Good evening and welcome to the March 12, 2014 meeting of the Edina Planning Commission. My name is Kevin Staunton. I'm the chair of the commission. Chris, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Forrest? Here. Commissioner Platter? Here. Commissioner Carr? Here. Commissioner Lee? Here. Commissioner Halva? Here. Commissioner Staunton? Chair Staunton? Commissioner Kilberg?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Potts?
Here.
Commissioner Schroeder?
Here.
Thank you. Our agenda next calls for approval of the meeting agenda, but before we do that, I would like to note that there were a couple of new names in the roll call and introduce our two new commissioners, Joanne Olson, who's sitting to my left here, and Susan Lee sitting to the right. So I'm very excited that we have them on board, and we're looking forward to welcoming them to the team, and happy to have you as part of our commission. So next up is approval of the meeting agenda. Are there any additions or modifications to the meeting agenda this evening? Commissioner Platter.
So I have a question. Commissioner Forrest and I want to talk about the potential small area plan for Valley View. Should that be on the agenda or in the Chair and Commission comments? I would be fine. Why
don't we put it under reports and recommendations after the tree preservation?
Okay.
I knew there was something that we wanted on there, and I couldn't remember what it was.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else that we need to add to the agenda? All right, seeing no other suggestions, I would take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next up is approval of the consent agenda. The only item on the consent agenda this evening is the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission from February 26, 2014. Jackie forwarded copies of that set of minutes to us. Are there any suggested revisions or modifications to the minutes? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Next up is the community comment portion of our meeting. This is the time during each meeting that we set aside to hear comments from members of the community about items that are not on this evening's agenda. And so if there is anyone here who would like to share a thought with us, please come to one of the microphones and state your name and address and share your thought. And I see the camera panning to the cast of thousands out there. And I don't see anyone rushing to the microphones, so I would take a motion to close community comment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. All right, so community comment is closed. Next up is the public hearing section of our agenda. We have one public hearing this evening. It is a variance for Amy Sells at 6604 Scandia Road. And Chris, you're going to introduce this? Very good.
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, the subject property is located at 6604 Scandia Road. It is a variance for front yard setback. The subject property is located on the south side of Scandia Road cul-de-sac. It's highlighted in blue. There's a little closer look at the property. It looks like a rambler from the front, although there's an expansion area with 2 bedrooms above. This is the house that's directly to the west, the house that's directly to the east. Here is a photograph of the house from the front and then also from the back, and you can see that there is currently living space centered in the back portion of the house. This is a recent survey of the property, and highlighted in yellow is really the area in question where they would like to add a full second floor above their existing building footprint. They don't have any intention of adding on to the footprint of the house, but what they would like to do is stack a second floor above. Unfortunately, the location of their house, the front corner of the house, because of the curvature of the street and the angle of the lot, is located a little less than 30 feet from the front lot line. The ordinance requires that this property meet the setback, front yard setback of the home that's directly to the west, which is 40.3 feet. And what that does then is it creates this portion of the home non-conforming, overlapping that setback. Now, the existing home could be expanded to that 29.2 setback on the first floor. However, because there's no second floor area in that area, it's just centered towards the back, they would need to obtain a front yard setback variance in order to just simply stack living space above. This is a more detailed survey with more detailed information, and what you can see is that the house to the east is actually 30 feet away from that Scandia Road right-of-way. They also front Scandia. The front of their house faces east, so this is actually their side street, so they're not added into the average equation for front yard setback. The subject property has to meet the 40.3 feet according to our ordinance. But you can see that going around the cul-de-sac, there are homes that are similar distance as the existing home is at currently. This is the existing basement, and again, they're showing the setback line and all of the floor plans. This would be the existing first floor plan, and then the existing second floor plan with the two bedrooms on that second floor. They'd like to expand over the entire first floor, which would include this area that overlaps into that setback area. They're just going to be modifying the basement, reconfiguring the interior spaces of the first floor. They won't be adding onto the footprint. And then adding full living space above, which would include 2 bedrooms, a master bedroom, some bathroom area, and laundry. This would be the new front elevation. It does meet all of the setback height and coverage requirements. And then the side and rear elevation of the home. This is a color rendering of the new look of the home with that second floor. What's a little deceiving is that the middle portion of the house is inset and further away from the front face of the home. This is the closest portion of the home, and this is the area above that requires the front yard setback. The area above the garage is actually a little bit further back, so it's not that flat looking in real life. So the primary issue is the proposed development reasonable for the site. The proposed use is permitted in the R1 single dwelling unit district. It will meet all of the ordinance requirements with the exception of that second floor addition. The current home is non-conforming, and it's as a result of the location of that home to the west, although there are homes that are practically as close as the existing home is. Will relieve practical difficulties that prevent reasonable use. Staff does believe the proposed variance is reasonable. A practical difficulty is the original placement of the home and then also the placement of the adjacent home. Are there circumstances that are unique to the property, not self-created? The unique circumstance is the inability to increase that roof height in that specific area where they'd like to have the master bedroom. It actually would be quite a design challenge to try to figure out how you would inset that at a curve to meet the setback. Staff does recommend approval based on the following findings: that with the exception of the variance for front yard setback, the proposal would meet the required standards for the ordinances in the R1 district. The proposal would meet the required standards for variance because the proposed use of the property is reasonable, as it slightly alters existing conditions without reducing any setbacks or distances between structures or impacting the surrounding neighborhoods. The imposed front yard setback in existing house location does not provide opportunity for an increased roof pitch in that area, although there is already living space within that area at the 29.2 foot setback. The original placement of the home closer to the front lot line makes it difficult to adjust those living spaces on the second floor. Approval of any variance should be subject to the following conditions. The survey date stamped February 25th, 2014, and building plans and elevations date stamped February 25th, 2014, and those that have been shown to you this evening. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Assistant Planner Ocker? Commissioner Platter.
Hey, Chris, looks like a nice addition here, but my question is, and I think I might know the answer to this, does our new construction management plan apply to this as a major remodel?
No, it's not a tear-down rebuild, and it's
Okay.
not, you have to, no, it doesn't.
So is the city working on anything like that? No? Okay. So I just going through the correspondence here, and somebody had a concern on cutting and wood, and I'm assuming general construction debris on the property. And I was just concerned, is that a condition we could apply to this, conforming to the construction management plan? I mean,
You could. You could
just for
require
the
them.
applicants, it's nothing that you probably wouldn't already do, but it sets rules on the timing and the hours that people can work, and the construction debris and parking, and it's more of a common sense thing, but unfortunately people weren't using common sense. So I would make that recommendation for this, because it is a substantial remodel.
So before we dive into the merits and the deliberations, any further questions for Chris? Okay, thank you, Chris. The applicants, I assume, since you weren't running up for community comment, that you're here on this item. Come on up and introduce yourselves and tell us about your project. The side microphones are best unless you have something to show us. You could do both sides at the same time if you want.
We need to hit the green button, or?
No, that just tells you how long you have.
Hello, Ryan Tuftedall. I'm the architect for the project. I reside at 11420 Park Ridge Drive West in Minnetonka.
Welcome.
And I'll let the owners.
I'm the homeowner, Amy Sells.
Welcome, Ms. Sells.
Thank you.
And I'm Matthew Scheidler. I'm Amy's fiance.
Welcome, Mr. Scheidler. So who wants to tell us about the project?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Chris did an excellent job of explaining, what we were trying to do. I think we were a little bit surprised when we found out that the ordinance was written in such a way that it didn't sort of average the cul-de-sac out, which obviously would have, put us really, really close, or within a foot, I think I figured out. And actually, though, I think the ordinance, if you take it pretty strictly, it puts about 40% of all the homes on the setback, or 40% of all the homes outside of the setback, or would need a variance to do anything to the front of their home, I guess. So I think that, pretty clearly, this home sits, within a foot or two of a number of other properties on the cul-de-sac. The adjacent property right now currently is in violation of their side setback by, I think it was 2 feet. Or maybe just slightly under 2 feet, if I'm correct. And so they must have had a pretty serious challenge with trying to fit that wide of a house onto that piece of property, kept pushing the property back until it kind of fit, but it actually doesn't fit because they violated the side setback, and then that kind of forced that 40-foot number for that home. So I think overall it's a pretty reasonable request, and I think they're pretty excited to have an expansion to their home that, we're not trying to, do anything over the top. We're not expanding towards the front or anything like that. Just trying to make that upstairs work a little bit better, not unlike almost all the other Edina homes. So with that, maybe I'll see if the owners want to make some comments.
So Amy Sells again. Hello. For me personally, I understand the variances and the need to look at that from investment into the community and where the location of the house. My daughter goes to Edina Valley View and then into the high school, and so this is the perfect location. Right now, she's upstairs and I'm downstairs, and really the upstairs, there's challenges with the amount of attic space and the heat and the cooling, and I've always wanted to build up to have a full second story. So the variance, I mean, to me, it is more of a personal, like a wish to be able to have a full story, second story, but I understand that the variance exists, so it just means a lot to stay in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Sells.
Could I add one more thing? We did a pretty good analysis of the neighborhood as well, and the majority, probably 70% of the homes are two-story homes in the area, so it would be very in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. It wouldn't be like everything was a rambler and we're trying to put on a second story or something like that. So
Certainly is one of the elements we have to consider when we're looking at a variance. Any questions for the applicants? All right, thank you. Don't go far. We may come up with some questions. This is a public hearing, and so this is the time of the public hearing that we would invite comments from members of the public who are in attendance, and it looks like no one else is, but I would note that we did receive a number of copies of emails, one of which from your next-door neighbor, Mr. Westner, was in the packet, but then there were a number of other emails, and it looks like you had kind of actively solicited comments and received some comments back, so we appreciate receiving that information as well. Seeing no other people in attendance seeking to make comment, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion carries. So we'll move the deliberation to the commission. Discussion. Any comments, questions, discussion from members of the commission? Commissioner Potts.
Just briefly, this reminds me of my own home, where I added a second floor and realized I needed to get a variance approved in order to do that. Went through the process, and this is a case, I think, similar to that, where it makes all the sense in the world. And I also appreciate the reuse of the existing structure and not doing a complete tear down. I think we see enough of those. So I would support this request, and in fact be willing to move approval based on staff findings and conditions and Commissioner Plattiter's inclusion of the construction management plan as a condition of approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Carrie or Chris, if we were to include a construction management condition, what would that look like? I mean, I'm not, or maybe Commissioner Plattiter, if you wanted to elaborate, would it be something that would just be generated by the builder and then submitted to staff to guide the process?
Yeah, that would be my understanding how it is done for teardowns. It's basically a list of items. Again, most are common sense things, but
Right.
but nevertheless, it's a guide for the city and their neighbors to know these guidelines are being adhered to as they go through the construction. And I'm certainly open to them looking at it in advance if there's any questions or pieces to that.
Well, and I assume they would be generating that, the applicant or the builder would be generating that plan and then
Correct.
submitting it to staff for approval.
That'd be my understanding.
Is that Carrie and Chris? Are we on the right page there?
Yeah, we have the standard document,
Okay.
the construction management plan, and they would need to meet all those conditions. And we'll send that out to the applicants tomorrow.
Okay. Commissioner Schroeder.
I just have a question about that. So they're not obligated to follow it now because they haven't passed the threshold. So are we obligating our staff to pursue something that they wouldn't normally be having to be responsible for?
Yes.
In which case, I'm wondering if we could encourage them to follow the guidelines of the construction management plan without actually having to go through the process of having staff come out and review it. I think it's a good guideline whether staff is reviewing it and enforcing it or whether it's just there as a guide for the construction process.
Commissioner Platter, I know it was your suggested condition.
Well,
is
Carrie,
that-
let me ask you this. Does city staff come out if there's no complaints? Is it more if nothing bad happens, if you will?
The building department is out just reviewing building permits.
Right, they're doing that anyway.
The residential redevelopment coordinator would not seek out this site unless there was a complaint. So that would be the added staff that would monitor the site to make sure that those conditions of the construction management plan are met.
So I think what you're saying, unless something went amiss, it would not be any additional work for the staff, correct? Because the building inspector would be there anyway as part of that.
That's correct.
Right.
Commissioner Schroeder.
So the question I have then is, what is the threshold then when we have the construction management apply to remodeling or additions? Is it now anything? Even though this doesn't meet the requirements, are we pushing that threshold down and this becomes kind of the de facto requirement for anybody taking on a remodeling or addition of the house?
Commissioner Forrest.
I would say no, because each variance is supposed to be held on its own merits. So at this point in time, we're just addressing this as a variance condition. And I would tie that to the finding that the homes on this cul-de-sac are in close proximity and that the home is located on a cul-de-sac, so that limits the ingress and egress of construction vehicles.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Schroeder.
Every time we have a variance, it's because something is too close. That's the reason that this is before us today. And it just seems that when we have a setback variance, it's because it's violating something that doesn't fit, and it's looked at in terms of the proximity of this home to its property lines, not this home relative to a property line relative to the home next door. I don't disagree with the idea of having people abide by the tenets of the construction management plan. I just don't want us to be pushing the threshold down to a point where it applies to every single project that a proponent might take on.
I think that the standard, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but for any condition that we want to attach to a variance, there really has to be a nexus to the variance. It has to be related to the reason why they need a variance. And so I guess I'd suggest that the way we think about this is, what is it about this particular variance, going to Commissioner Schroeder's point? Are we going to require this of every single variance just because we can, or is there something particular about the variance that triggers this, other than maybe it's just the complaint of the neighbor or the concern of the neighbor about
That's what
configuration?
the concern of the neighbor is what in particular I thought of that at that point in this case. Having said all that, I think the city certainly should look at something, because some of these remodels are as just disruptive as a complete tear down. And I think it's 50%. Is it 50% that's torn down? You know, I mean, I suspect actually this one isn't that far off by the time you scrape off the upper level. So maybe it already does apply. But these are, in my mind, can be just as disruptive as if it's a complete tear down. So anyway, part of the thing that got me concerned about it was the letter from the neighbor about the asthma and the sawdust, quite frankly.
Did you, Commissioner
Yeah,
Fox?
I was just going to concur with that. I think that raised the issue, and this is one small thing we can do to give the adjacent neighbors some level of comfort as they prepare to go through what's a disruptive process.
Commissioner Carr.
It might be a slippery slope, though, in that every time someone comes to us with a variance, there's always going to be issues of disruption to the neighborhood. And again, I don't know that this is unique. Concerns about dust, I think it's good that the neighbor has brought that to our attention, but whether it requires that we actually add that as a condition to the variance, I don't know that I'm convinced yet.
Chris, could you put up the, I think it's item A1 in the packet. I'm just trying to make sure I understand which property is associated with the concern about the dust. I think I know which one it is, but I don't think I have them on Is it the one where they face the other street, but their backyard is behind your backyard? Okay. I think I know which one. No, I think it's one more down Scandia. Yeah, is that 6606?
6606.
It's
So-
the corner lot.
So maybe go one more. Actually, one page previous to that. Or maybe you don't have it on your... One more earlier. No. You don't have the property map from Hennepin County. That's A1 on our...
Oh,
Or we could just lay it on the overhead. All right, so just so we're all on the same page here, it's the one right next door there? Okay. So it's not. I thought maybe it was the one behind both of them and that it was...
Oh, this one? No,
Yeah, but
it's-
it's not. Okay.
this one right there.
Now, I don't know if that has any impact on the, this nexus discussion that we're having. Commissioner Potts?
I think I would just point out relative to the construction management plan, those standards are simply good practices. They're not burdensome or overbearing in almost any way. It simply puts some limitations on hours and parking regulations, things like that. So I don't think we're imposing any sort of hardship on the builder or the homeowners who are expanding with this request.
Well, I would agree with that, but I think Commissioner Schroeder's point was, is this just going to be an automatic anytime somebody is asking for a variance, they're going to have to comply with something that they otherwise wouldn't be technically required to comply with, even though they may comply with it without even knowing that they're complying with it.
Well, I think
Sure, and I would consider it on a case-by-case basis.
I was going to say the same thing. I think we've had many of these through here that hasn't come up, but seeing this one letter, that's why in this particular case, and each variance stands alone, right? So,
Right. But I think it's a fair question. Since there has to be a nexus to the particular variance that's being requested, it shouldn't be just because there's variance. And I understand that you've made the case that there is a particular issue in this case that you think justifies that additional condition. Commissioner Carr.
Carrie, do you have any history on discussions perhaps that the City Council had when they passed this requirement for a construction plan and why they chose the 50% tear down as the criteria for requiring that?
Yeah, they did have they did have discussion around that issue. We thought this was a starting point, a good starting point. Since then, this issue has come up with significant remodels. So as time goes on, it seems to be becoming more and more of an issue. So it's something that we'll have to be considering here in the near future. Do we want to expand beyond just that 50% rule?
Commissioner Forrest.
Well, that's what I said. That's why I said it was the nexus. Not every variance has to do with proximity of homes to one another. There's a lot of different reasons for variances. And what I said here was we could tie it to the finding that you've got a street here with limited street parking because it's the cul-de-sac and the driveways that all enter onto it, and because the homes are in close proximity. So I just offered that as a finding that could be used as the nexus you're calling.
Commissioner Carr.
Just one more question, Carrie, again, could you confirm that in fact the construction management plan will not impose any additional costs or expenses on the applicant?
I can confirm that. With a demolition permit, there is I believe it's $2,000. We would not require them to get a demolition permit as part of this. They would just be subject to those construction management rules.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schroeder.
I'm not going to get in the way of this. This is a good project, and it's a reasonable addition for the neighborhood. I won't be voting for the motion. I won't be voting against it either.
How are you going to do that? Sure you don't want to move it and then move against it? No. The good news is this is mostly an academic discussion up here. don't get too nervous. Commissioner Lee.
Since this is my first time on the commission, I just will test the waters a little bit, and also for my own education. I know that there have been a lot of renovations in the city of Edina, and one of the issues is the issue of a tear down or an expansion of the house that really fills the site, the McMansions, so to speak. I think that one of the considerations, aside from on this particular project, actually to be commended for staying within the footprint and actually simply adding a second story. But the aesthetics and the volume, the sheer volume of a building also needs to be considered in some way other than just always looking at it from a two-dimensional perspective as a footprint. And I do have to say I have some concerns about the sheer volume of this. Although the majority of the homes in this area, there are some second-story elements to it. Most of them come with a one-story garage. Only a portion of the home is 2 stories. There may be a few that are going to be as expansive as this, which is a full, basically a box, rectangle, 2-story residence. So are there any points along the review process where something like that's ever taken into consideration when a permit is initially applied for? Or do all the constraints really just rely sort of looking at the variance and the footprint?
So I think it's a good question, and Carrie or Chris, you can chime in. My own take is that the element that has to do with the character of the neighborhood is the one that we look at in variances. To the point that you're raising is, even if you can satisfy the practical difficulties and the fact that it's a unique circumstance, is there something about the change that is going to make it stick out, that is going to change the character of the neighborhood? And I think in some of the past variances we've considered, we've certainly said this is too much, and not too much because I think it's more than I would need, or someone else thinks it's more than they would need, but too much vis-a-vis the properties and the houses and the character of the properties around it. So I think it's a fair question, and one that we should be looking at in this case and all of the variance cases that come in front of us.
So in this particular one, the variance existed. I guess you could say that by the placement of the foundation, it was already grandfathered in, that it was in violation of the setback. So now there's an opportunity to build a second story. Again, that comes into play. I wouldn't say that the second story is necessarily a grandfathered in condition. On the original home, I found it interesting that the hip roof, which is to be commendable on this house, in most cases a hip roof is applied to get away from sort of those peaked barnyard elevations where it really brings the height of the roof up in the air. So a hip is a way of kind of minimalizing and pulling back from that facade or elevation. In the original floor plan, you'll see that the first story portion, the second story portion, I should say, is all at the rear of the house, and the hip portion of the part that's directly over the variance is actually stepping back away from that property line, which to me, maybe at the time it was just sort of accidental, because I think this cul-de-sac kind of came in after the fact. But it does say that there are ways to approach that variance. You have an opportunity when you add a second story to look at that as a new constraint. Is there a way to add a second story and still honor that setback? So those are just some things that I have noticed. And as far as we go forward, when we look at things that do request a variance, that we also take in consideration sort of that three-dimensional volume that impacts, I think, the site as well as the neighbors. This is going to be, particularly on one of the homes, I think that it will be quite visible. But that was more of a comment, I think, in the overall process, review process of how we go forward.
And certainly the the existing property or the existing house, how it's placed on the property, I guess my take on it is that it is a nonconformity in the sense that at the time it was put in, it was probably legal, but then the code changed to make it illegal.
Right.
So it's not a violation, so to speak. It's just a nonconforming configuration or site plan. And so you're correct that they don't get grandfathered. That's why they have to be in for a variance. And I think that the way the house is placed on the site is part of how you articulate why this is not a hardship or a difficulty that's caused by the property owner. They're kind of stuck with it, and unless they're going to move a second story back away from that, which can create some odd architectural features, that's a problem. Further thoughts on Commissioner Lee's comments? All right, we do have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion and the second? Chris, let's do a roll call because Commissioner Schroeder has suggested he's going to do something. I want to make sure it's on the record.
Commissioner Forrest? Commissioner Platter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carr?
Aye.
Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Chair Stoughton?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Potts?
Aye.
Commissioner Schroeder?
Abstain.
All right, so the motion passes and the variance has been granted. I always look to Carrie and Chris when I say this because sometimes they say, no, it's going to go another, but this is a done deal now. Okay. Unless there is an appeal. And how long a time do we wait for the appeal? 10 days. So there's a 10-day period where people are entitled, all the people who were here tonight protesting it are entitled to appeal. And if that time passes without an appeal, your variance is granted, and good luck with your project. All right, next up on the agenda is reports and recommendations. The first item we have is the tree preservation code amendment that we've been working on for several meetings for the benefit of Commissioners Lee and Olson, who have not had the chance to go through this with us. I don't know if Commissioner Platter or Carrie, if you want to give an overview of kind of where we are and a little bit of fill-in on where we've been.
Certainly. I can kind of summarize the ordinance that's in front of you, just go through the memo that was provided. So this item was tabled from our last meeting. The commission had several recommendations to be made to the ordinance. Those changes are underlined in the ordinance, and the rest of the text is as was previously drafted. Also, the commission had requested some additional information in regard to some staffing concerns in enforcement of the ordinance, and we've brought back a little more information in that regard. So to summarize the ordinance here, this ordinance will apply to all demolition permits, building permits applications for an addition, or a permit for an accessory structure like a garage, deck, or a pool. All permits would be required to include a certified tree inventory indicating where all the mature trees, I take that back, where all the trees on the site would be located on the site. The trees that are protected under this ordinance include birch, balsam fir, black walnut, buckeye, cedar, elm, hemlock, hickory, ironwood, linden, locust, maple, except silver maples, Norway pine, oak, spruce, and white pine varieties. So what this ordinance will do is that any healthy protected tree that's removed within the building pad or within a 10-foot area around the building pad or within a driveway or parking area have to be replaced on a 1-to-1 basis. One of the changes that's included in the in the ordinance tonight is that any healthy removable tree that's larger than 5 inches in caliper also have to be replaced on a 1-to-1 basis. Any healthy protected tree that's outside of those areas, those have to be that are removed, those have to be replaced on a 2-to-1 basis. Protected trees need to remain protected during construction. On that certified survey, they're going to show what kind of tree protection is going to be installed on the site, and staff is asked to monitor the construction projects up to 3 years after the building permit. So the ordinance here will add some added expense to applicants, building permit applicants, for that tree survey. And the second concern that staff had is in regard to properly enforcing this ordinance. Currently, our city forester is a part-time position. They work about 34 hours a week on average. In his review of the ordinance, he believed that he would need some help in doing that and suggested maybe an additional part-time position. Another option that we've kind of talked about is if the city forester was to become full-time and dedicate a portion of his week to enforcing this ordinance. And obviously there's a lot of people who are reviewing these building permits as they come in, the planning department, as well as the environmental resource coordinator. You know, there's a lot of people out on the site that could assist in this as well. But we do see that as a concern that there's a lot of hours here for enforcement and inspection of all these sites. As you know, our building permit, they have not slowed down. We set a record last year with over 100 tear-down rebuilds, and we're certainly not seeing that slow down any. And the recent moratorium in Minneapolis may have an impact with more people coming to Edina. So we don't see the building activity slowing down anytime soon. But with that, I can turn it back to the Planning Commission for any questions, comments, discussion.
I know one of the issues that came up at our last meeting was there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that we're only applying this to new construction, remodel. Basically, construction activity is the only time that you're limited in terms of the tree ordinance. We do have a provision in here which kind of includes tree removal that happens as much as 1 year prior to the construction activity or the building permit issuance. How long after? I noticed that we're following for 3 years, but is there a prohibition for some period of time after the construction is completed and the certificate of occupancy is issued before that would preclude someone from removing a tree during that time period?
We don't have anything after.
All right, so somebody could wait and do it afterwards, but we're presuming that, I think had we applied this to everything, we would have been getting just as much criticism about why are you being so broad. So I'm supportive of the limiting it to the construction situations, but that is an issue we should maybe talk about. Are there other questions for Carrie before I open the public hearing? Commissioner Platter.
Well, is there a public hearing? We had a public hearing last time.
Yeah, I think it's a continued public hearing.
The public hearing was closed.
Oh, it was closed.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, there's not a whole lot of people here for the.
I was just
Mr.
asking-
Tuftedall, did you want to comment on this issue?
I think we just had a little bit of confusion on whether or not you were voting on adding the amendment, and then whether or not you were voting, because you were going to abstain from
on your
adding
issue.
the amendment to the variance, and then whether or not you're actually voting for the variance or voting to add the amendment.
So on this is the last issue. It was a condition that was added, and that was part of the vote.
Okay.
And so what I'd
So you
recommend
didn't
do
vote,
is...
you didn't necessarily vote to add the condition?
Yes, we did. It was part of the motion.
Oh, okay.
So part of the motion included that extra condition.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what I would do
Perfect.
is touch base with staff
Perfect. Sorry about
tomorrow,
that.
and they'll
Thanks
be
so
able-
much.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it.
Happy to clear it up. It does finesse the public hearing question since no one is here anyway. So apparently we've closed the public hearing so we can move directly.
Fair point. I was just, because anyway.
That's
That was
right.
just a question, because I know some other things that are when they're closed, they're closed. That's just a comment.
Yep. So on that point, any discussion on the point of we're back in the tree ordinance. On the point that I raised about certainly as it's written, you could go remove trees after you get your certificate of occupancy. And I don't know if that's something we should address, or do we care about, or Commissioner Platter.
I mean, I guess you could, but part of this is that I think it's a rare circumstance if people go through all of that to get there and that's still there. I don't think there'd be a huge people doing that, I guess is my point. Personally, I don't know if anyone else has any
Commissioner
comments.
Carr.
I'm not quite sure I understood your comment, but I mean, in Section 8, it talks about the permit holder shall not leave any protected tree without guards, etc. Then it goes on to say, city monitoring is required for all projects to ensure that all trees are properly established and maintained for 3 years. Are you raising the issue that there's no requirement that the property owner maintain those trees?
No, I'm the issue I'm raising is so a property owner who doesn't pull a building permit or demolition permit or do anything is entitled to remove trees from their property.
Yeah.
And so once the certificate of occupancy is issued, the new property owner is entitled to remove trees from their property. Now, my own view is that people aren't bound and determined to go out and find trees to remove. I think most people don't want to remove them. And it ends up being a kind of convenience during the construction process, and one of the reasons I think this is a good ordinance is we're just trying to make people think this through before they just willy-nilly take trees out during the construction process. Commissioner Carr.
Well, you know, the impetus for this tree ordinance really had to do with the number of complaints I think the city has received about trees being torn down on an entire site during construction. So the ordinance is not intended to address the desire to maintain the tree canopy throughout Edina on all private property. Homeowners still have the right to take down their trees. We wanted to address a specific problem. Now, there's some cities that actually adopt much broader tree ordinances to protect the tree canopy in the entire city, and private property owners don't have the rights to tear down protected trees, regardless of whether there's construction. But we felt that this was an appropriate starting point, because this is probably where the key risk is for large trees to be torn down.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And one of the reasons I raised this is that some of the written comments we've received and that are in our packet again this evening, go to this issue of why aren't you more broadly? And I think you've eloquently described the motivation behind us pursuing this in the first place, and most of the concerns we were getting were from people who were on, tear down replacements, and that the construction activity was really having an impact on trees on those sites.
That's exactly right. That's why we put this together.
Okay. Other comments? Commissioner Platter and then Commissioner Carr.
So I was just going to say, Carrie, to your point about the staff requirements, let me ask you this. If, for example, right now we say that they're monitored for 3 years afterwards, so if that, let's just hypothetically, if that went down to 1 year, would that how much of a staff reduction would that be? Or is that, I guess I'm wondering if that's an appropriate compromise versus the concerns from staff, or at least a step towards that.
Yeah, I think that would be easier to manage than 3 years. That would be a lot to keep track of, a 3-year window.
Commissioner Carr.
Well, in looking at that particular language, it's not really clear what the word monitoring means. It says the city staff is required to monitor the trees to make sure they're properly established and maintained for 3 years. What does that monitoring require? It could mean that they check on the trees at the end of the 3-year period. So it's not really clear on that, and maybe we need to make clear what the city's obligations are. I don't know whether a year is sufficient. Generally, when a person plants a tree, they're not going to rip it out, even after a year. So, I'm kind of up in the air about whether we put a year in or 3 years, but I think a year is a little bit short, but at least I think it's long enough so that, again, homeowners would not rip those trees out.
Well, and as I read this, it seems to apply to those trees that already existed. It doesn't seem to apply to replacement trees. It seems to apply to those that you're taking steps to protect during the construction process to try and ensure that the protection measures taken during that process are effective.
Well, it looks like it applies to both. City staff monitoring is required for all projects with affected protected trees and or replacement trees.
It was meant to capture both there. But again, kind of Commissioner Carr's point also, I think we're agreeing for the most part. If a year, maybe it's 2 years, what does that mean? Maybe it's one check at the end of 2 years to see what's still there. Is that, I don't know if anyone else has any other comments. So I don't think the intent is that there's a continuous monitor and someone goes by there weekly or monthly or in this case maybe even yearly. If at the end of 2 years there's a check to see what was left.
Commissioner Schroeder.
I think the 3-year criteria is a good one because most construction impacts on trees don't even show up until year 3 or year 4 or year 5. It's not in the first or second year. So I think it's important to maintain that, even if the only inspection, the only monitoring that happens is at the end of that 3-year period.
Maybe that's a clarification. So it's...
Well, I certainly think it makes sense that the time period ought to be the time period we think is necessary to make sure the tree hasn't been damaged by the construction activity. I mean, I don't know if we need anything more in the ordinance to that effect.
Probably not. It's more on staff understanding, right?
It does talk about ensuring that all such trees are properly established and maintained. It kind of makes it clear to the property owner that they're going to have to keep that tree alive for 3 years. All right.
So we agree there's no change on that then?
It'd be a good thing.
In the ordinance, at least.
Other comments, questions? Commissioner Olson.
I had a question. I know this is all new, but can somebody explain the difference between the 1-to-1 ratio and the 2-to-1 ratio, what the criteria is?
The rationale why we're doing
Well,
that?
I'm confused reading this. Which one does the 2-to-1? What causes that?
So Commissioner Platter, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so the 2-to-1 was trying to be an incentive to leave the tree. In other words, if you leave it, if it's outside the footprint, if you just leave it, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to replace it. It's kind of a pseudo penalty, if you will. Maybe it's easier for somebody to tear down and replace 2 new ones, but the thought was that because you had to replace it with 2 new ones, that there's some incentive to leave the one as it is. The other ones where we're doing a 1-for-1 was fairly basic, and Commissioner Schroeder, I'm hoping what got in here is meet your expectations for the... Okay, and anyway, so that was more on where it had to be removed because of it's in the footprint or of the building or something else to at least replace that in kind somewhere on the property. And also has a provision in here if there is no place to replace it, it could be in the city somewhere else as well.
The other thing, I think my own perspective is that, if we were a city with a lot of undeveloped lots that were heavily wooded, this might be a little bit onerous on somebody coming in because then you'd have to move you'd have to replace every tree. But the feeling we had was that most lots already have a structure on them, and so it's going to apply. There's not going to be a tree within the footprint of the existing structure. It's really a tear down. And now if you're expanding and you're going to expand the footprint, then you're going to have to replace the trees that you're going to take out.
Yeah, kind of onto that, most, like you said, most of these lots already have a house on them. So if you expand the house, what's that going to be, 1 or 2 trees probably it displaces? I don't know. There's always exceptions to that, but it's trying to capture those pieces. It'd be different if we're coming forth with this and all these undeveloped lots where there's 12 trees and that would be, and there may be exceptions out there to this, but in general, it was trying to capture the first situations.
Okay.
That actually triggers one other question for me, and I'll come back to you, Commissioner Olson, if you have further. Carrie, is this part of the zoning? Would this be part of the zoning code?
No, this will be put into the construction management.
So what I'm really driving at is there a variance process available for this?
No.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, because if you get the really, there's always going to be some oddball case. We could put a variance process right into this ordinance, couldn't we?
We could and should. We can just refer to the section, the chapter 36
Yeah, just by
variance
reference
process.
say, variance can be applied for per the criteria of, okay. All right, sorry, I interrupted you, Commissioner Olson. Did you have more?
Oh, no, I was just reading the summary comments, so it just says, within driveway parking area must be replaced 1-to-1. And then on the next page, it says within driveway parking area must be replaced 2-to-1. So I just got confused what what that threshold is. From
Well, that's a good
1-to-1
point.
to 2-to-1. But I'm trying to look for that in the ordinance, so.
Carrie, can you shed any light on that?
I'm not catching where.
Well, am I reading this wrong? So it just goes.
No, I think
Yeah, just reading the summary.
so on your memo.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find the 2-to-1 in the ordinance, sorry. Am I looking at it?
Can I speak to that? Because I think what it gets to, when you look at section 5, subsection 5, a protected tree is removed, it must be replaced with 2 trees. And it's my comment relative to section 7 is we say it should be that a removable tree greater than 5 inches must be replaced at a ratio of 1-to-1. I think we should actually have parallel language in both sections to say that if a removable tree greater than 5 inches is removed, it must be replaced by 1 tree, subsequent to the conditions of subsection 5. So we're not talking about a tree replacement in a ratio that somebody might interpret to be inches in the removable tree or trees in the protected tree.
And then I would have seen it.
One more time. You know what you're saying.
Right. I'm just looking at providing language that's essentially comparable in both sections. So where in section 5 we say a tree removed, a protected tree is replaced by 2 trees. In section 7 we should say a removable tree that's removed is replaced by 1 tree. Not the ratio. Get rid of the ratio because we don't speak to a ratio anywhere else in the core of the. We do in the summary, but we don't in the actual ordinance.
So can we have some specific language? Are you suggesting
Yes.
specific language for section 7?
In section 7, the underlined portion would be replaced by a statement that says, if a removable tree greater than 5 inches is removed, it must be replaced by 1 tree, subject to the conditions of subsection 5.
Right. So it would read as the other ones read.
Just
correct?
parallel language, yes.
So that sentence, so Carrie, did you get that?
I got most of it, and I can go back to the tape too.
Well, because if
It's a
we
pretty easy
vote
one.
to move this along, I just want to make sure everybody understands that. So you're adding a sentence to section 7.
I'm actually replacing the portion that has been adjusted for this meeting. The underlined portion is removed
All right?
and replaced by the new language.
It's just to match the other portions.
Yeah.
Does that address your concern, Commissioner Olson?
Yes, it does.
All right. Other comments? Commissioner Forrest?
I'm a bit concerned about number 4, saying that a protected tree less than 5 inches in caliber must be moved. If you're talking, I can see where it could be less expensive to purchase a tree of similar size that's less than 5 inches in caliber, that's healthy and may actually provide a better replacement than moving an existing tree. So I'm not sure I would have that be so strict. I think it's an option, but I think you should be allowed to replace that tree.
I seem to be having a difficult time understanding the English language tonight.
To
Can you run
get a
that by me one
spade
more
or
time?
to move a tree can be expensive, especially if it's just large enough that you need to get a tree spade to do it. So you could perhaps replace it with an even healthier, better shaped tree than for less money than spading the one across the yard. So I'm thinking there should be an option to move it or replace it.
But you said in section 4, is that what?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification on
Commissioner
that.
Schroeder.
And Commissioner Forrest, I think what you'd find in the industry is that a tree that's 4.5-inch caliper that you're buying would come with a tree spade. What you'll find in the nursery is once trees get past 3 or 3.5 inches, if they haven't been sold, they cut them down and they plant new ones. They're not waiting for someone to buy the 4.5-inch caliper trees.
But they aren't saying that it's a 4.5-inch tree, though. It could be a 1-inch tree that's being required to be moved too, which it wouldn't necessarily be as expensive, but it might not be a particularly healthy thing for the tree for somebody. I'm open. That's just was a red flag for me.
Commissioner Platter.
I've been kind of waffling on number 4 myself for a couple reasons. One is that, to Commissioner Forrest's point, to some extent, who knows if what tree they're going to move, and if actually they would be more likely that the new homeowner would pick something, I don't want to say better, and that might be the wrong word, but more closely matching other things versus just having them preserve what's there. So my comment is to actually move to strike number 4 from here. So in other words, they're still required to replace trees. It's just some of these smaller ones and moving them, and does it work? And when you get it from a nursery, usually it'd be in a ball. It's kind of nicely wrapped, and some people may disagree, but I think on a site, who knows where those roots could go, and do you have much less of a chance of preserving it than we may think you do. And I know one of the comments that came in kind of addressed this item as well. So go ahead.
If it was removed, it wouldn't prohibit someone from moving it, would it?
No, it would not, but I'm not sure we should be requiring it to be
Right.
moved.
No, I get the distinction, but then if somebody thought it could work
Certainly.
and could maintain it for 3 years,
Correct.
then
Yep.
they could do it. Okay. Comments on that suggested revision of striking paragraph number 4? Not sure whether that means people are in favor or opposed, but we'll find out, I guess.
Doesn't seem like they disagree.
Other comments on the proposed ordinance? So far I have comments on paragraph 4. Commissioner Platter suggesting that we just delete it. We have Commissioner Schroeder's suggestions for edits to paragraph 7. And then I think we would want to add a paragraph 10, or if we got rid of 4, it would be 9, making available a variance per the criteria in the zoning code. Are there other items of discussion on the proposed ordinance language? You're nodding vigorously over there, Carrie. Is there? It's all good? You got it? All right.
Yep.
So I'd entertain a motion. Commissioner Platter?
Can I make a motion subject to the items you just read, be added to this, to approve this ordinance and send it to council?
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion's been made and seconded to recommend passage of adoption of the proposed section 1082, which would be located in Chapter 10, Article 3 of the Edina City Code, adding Division 3 on tree protection, and the language that is before us this evening with 3 changes to it, deleting Section 4, deleting the proposed new sentence in Section 7 and replacing it with the language that Commissioner Schroeder recommended, and adding a new 10, which actually would be a new 9, for making a variance process available per the criteria in the zoning code. Further discussion. Commissioner Platter.
Just a comment. I understand the Environmental Commission is going to look at this tomorrow night, and hopefully we'll have a letter of support coming from their meeting. And I'm not. obviously not a sure thing, but there is under discussion tomorrow night at their meeting. Unfortunately, they didn't meet before this came up, so this would be their next meeting tomorrow night.
But the good news would be that they would have the finished product that we act on. I do think it would be very helpful for the council to hear from the Energy and Environment Commission on this issue. I want to, before we vote, I just want to thank Commissioner Platter and Commissioner Carr, who took the lead on this effort. It's several meetings now that we've been working away on this, and of course staff, Carrie and Chris, for helping us pull this together. I think it's a good recommendation, and I'll be voting in favor of it. So are there further discussion before we call the question? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion carries. And Carrie, you'll bring that, I don't know, when would that go then to the council?
I'll have to check and see what's available for the agenda on either April 1st or April 22nd. It will be a public hearing, though.
I was just going to ask that exact question. So I think it's important that people who are interested are aware of when it might be on the City Council agenda, and you're suggesting it'll be one of the 2 April agenda items. So anyone who's watching, I'd encourage you to check the city website and the agendas for the April 1st meeting as well as the April
22nd.
22nd meeting. Okay. Commissioner Platter.
Hey, just selfishly, the week of April 1st is spring break.
That was why I
Edina.
hesitated.
So if I
that
could
would be
make
the
a
next
suggestion,
available,
go to the
typically.
22nd if at all possible.
It would probably make it more accessible to people who are interested in commenting.
Let's make that decision right now. It will be April 22nd.
All right, I'd like that. So anyone watching, look for it on the City Council agenda on April 22nd, and obviously you can come out and share your feelings on it. It'll be a public hearing. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the Wooddale Valley View Road Small Area Planning Process. This is another item. We should stop and congratulate ourselves for checking one of the items off of our 2014 work plan, the tree preservation, which I think was also on our 2013 work plan. So this is another item that's on our 2014 work plan, and Commissioner Platter and Commissioner Forrest have been working with staff on teeing up a process, and I don't know, Mike, are you going to lead this discussion? Okay, great. So Commissioner Platter will share what's been going on this front.
So thanks for having myself and Commissioner Forrest here tonight.
Good to have you here.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, we've had a couple meetings with city staff so far, and Assistant Manager Kurt, she was here, I think, was it last time? She's actually putting together a small area plan guidelines for the city. So this would essentially partially be a trial run of that also. She's doing it for a class she's completing, but I think it'd be a very well-received asset to the city. So this would be one of the first ones that would come through that. And again, we can influence this both ways on what we do and also what she does to her plan. So as you're aware, in the 2014 plan that we have, one of the items on there was to provide a small area plan for Valley View and Wooddale Commercial District. So we had a few meetings together, just a quick run through on that with Commissioner Forrest, myself, Planner Teague, and Assistant City Manager Kurt. So we went through and what I want to do present today is just kind of an overall broad picture, get your comments on it, see if we're going in the right direction, based upon what happened in Grandview, partially what happened in Grandview, with how we want to proceed on this and any requirements. Again, this is a little smaller area, but we want to make sure everyone's involved in working through this, both the community and anyone else that's interested. So just a little bit on the map. Here's a location. I think people are fairly familiar with it, but it's just at the intersection of Wooddale and Valley View, just north of the crosstown. Here's a little close-up of the site. The arrow isn't quite right. It does not include this residential building here, but the rest, for the most part, it's a lot of small, mostly single-story retail on this site, all different ages, sizes, and everything. It appears to me mainly a community commercial node for that area. So what we want to do is from an overview, is first of all obtain approval from the Planning Commission and the City Council to go forth with this, with the items that we had. Our initial public forum we want to have is, and create a steering committee from that. I'll go into more detail on that in a minute. We'd also create and hold public input forums. We'd evaluate the public input results with staff, consultants, proposed recommendations. If all that goes well, we'd come back to the Planning Commission and the City Council for inclusion into the comprehensive plan at that point for these recommendations and how to develop that area. So what our proposal is 9 total for the steering committee. Again, that would hopefully be, I'll get into a second, but from an April 30th community meeting that we had put together. So we were looking at 2 planning liaisons, 1 or 2 staff members on that, 4 neighborhood representatives, and 2 local business representatives. Now that may not be how exactly it turns out as we go through the meeting and what people might have other ideas, but that was the initial plan, to have a group of that. So, I'd ask your feedback if that, of all this does this make sense? Are there people we should also include, other commissions, other staff, or, other community members for that? Again, we'd create the steering committee on the April 30th, out of the April 30th meeting. We'd use the steering committee to create an overall small area plan charter, schedule process, help administer the public input sessions, and then also the steering committee to provide recommendations back to the planning and the city council. Yes, Commissioner Carr.
You talked about people on the steering committee. I don't know whether someone like from the transportation department, Living Streets Advisory Group, Mark Nolan, if he would be a good person on this, just because again you're talking about a residential, well, commercial, but lots of residential very close. Just a thought.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that is one thing to point out here. It is very hemmed in by residential. I mean, literally the houses come right up to the back of the stores here. So that'll obviously be a concern as we go through this. And there is really no buffer zone for the most part. I don't know how much could be created there either. But that's a good point.
And from a staff resource perspective, I suppose that's something that planning staff can help coordinate with transportation staff and engineering and the like.
That was actually one of the commissioners we were thinking, transportation commissioner, but maybe Mark may be a better, I don't want to say better choice, that's the wrong word to say it, but he would have more from the city's standpoint within that, both the living streets and then the other transportation pieces there. I know there's been a fair amount of items brought up for transportation along Valley View Road to date as also. And then just a broad preliminary schedule. Again, we're here right now just seeking some guidance and hopefully an overall approval with this broad sense for this. The first public meeting, obviously there's some work we have to do before that, would be April 30th. And we'd also probably have to get to council before we have that meeting too, right? So maybe we can work. Well, we talked about the first actually,
April
didn't we?
1st, right?
Yeah. The steering committee meetings, the thinking out loud, that would be, throughout the summer, having them put together where we want to go, kind of trying to organize it. Finally, in the September, have public input forums for this, get citizen input, have some a couple discussions along with that. Somewhere in there, and it's kind of a question, we have a little bit of money to hire a consultant to help along in here. So when they come on board, part of the thinking is that it may be definitely after the steering committee is formed and done some things. So there'd be some recommendations coming out of that, an open house to go review it with the neighborhood as to what the results were. Coming out of that, having final recommendations before the planning commission and the council. Again, the goal would be to do this yet this year. It may be a little aggressive at this time, but it seems at this point, get going, it seems like it could be done. So I'd welcome any comments as to this overview. There's a lot more things to come, but I just wanted to get in front of people to start thinking about, if you have any input or things we're missing along the way here.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Schroeder.
I just have a question about actually taking this and incorporating the comprehensive plan now as opposed to holding it as a study report. We're going into the comprehensive planning phase probably in a year or 2 years. And I think in the past, in our last comprehensive plan, we had study reports that were appended to the comprehensive plan that were just held and eventually incorporated. And I don't know if there's an advantage or disadvantage, but the comprehensive plan amendment process requires you to go through the Metropolitan Council, and it might be better to just kind of lump all those things together into one change.
Probably a very good point. Did Grandview, that was an amendment to the comp plan, wasn't it?
No,
it wasn't. Okay, I was thinking.
It was adopted by the city council, but
Right.
it wasn't formally made. And at some point, we kind of renamed it to a development framework as opposed to a small area plan. I'm not sure that was the reason we didn't amend the comp plan with it, but
Yeah, I'm certainly open to that. I guess I was assuming wrongly that the Grandview had been already added to that, but I don't know that there's any, let me reemphasize, there's no known development happening here, so this isn't because some developer wants us to look at this. It's just an anticipation of what may change in this area. And I think that's a big point. I'll try to say that over and over again as we go through this process.
And I think one of the ways to say that, and what I'd suggest in terms of the kind of kickoff and explaining to people who come out to find out what this is all about, is that, in fact, the comprehensive plan does identify this as an area of potential change. And
right.
So even going back to 2008, this was one of the kind of areas around town that we as a community identified as a place that was likely to turn over at some point. And that's really how it got on our list, along with Grandview, and I know 44th and France is one of those, Cahill is one. And so this is a logical one to pursue. I guess following up on Commissioner Schroeder's question, I would ask, and I don't anticipate that you'll have the answer, but I think one of the things from my own experience that you'll want to think about is, what does the deliverable look like at the end? What is the plan going to look like? In the Grandview process, we spent a lot of time trying to think about how to make it, how to avoid the dusty old report on the shelf that no one looks at. And there's some good ideas on how to do that, and I just encourage that to be part of as you're putting the process together, to be thinking about what the deliverable is at the end.
Yeah, and I believe in the guide that's being developed right now for the city, I believe there are deliverables in there that would essentially try and standardize what they would come out of these. Of course, it's not going to be exact, but at least have a guideline for that. We can develop that as we go, but that's a very good point to start with the end in mind, right? Where we're going to get to.
Right.
And like I said, I'm certainly open to saving it for the comp plan if that's. I don't think this needs to go to the Beck Council, I guess, right at this point for just this project.
Well, and just making sure that whatever it is you do is documented well enough that when it comes time to incorporate it, people understand the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Correct.
Commissioner Potts?
In the interest of getting a little more information out here, I think a major part of the Grandview framework is the fact that the city owns a sizable parcel within that area. Similarly, on this site, if we could look at that aerial again, Commissioner Platter, I'm not sure if you know exactly which parcels are city-owned versus privately owned, but it'd be worth just pointing out for those who are watching that there is, I think, some significant area on the eastern edge of this zone that's city-owned property.
I don't know, so if someone else could point that out.
The city-owned parcel is this corner piece right here. It was an old gas station.
Is it just that one?
It is.
Oh, okay. I thought there were more.
Including that little parking stub? Or is it just up to where the parking is?
The parking stub is owned by the business on the corner.
Oh, it juts into that,
It
and
does.
then the grassy part that surrounds it is all owned by the city? Or is it just the triangle closest to Valley View?
Just the triangle.
Okay. Thank you. Good question. Other
Very
comments?
good point.
And I do think on the, I like what you and Karen Kurt have been talking about in terms of just trying to set some guidelines if we're going to continue to do small area plans. And I think it's a great way to engage the neighborhood and really get people in a small area to be invested in figuring out what they want the future to look like. But it's really helpful to have a template for trying to do that. And different areas will be different. This one, it looks like, will largely be privately owned, and so it's more what kind of zoning regulation, what kind of comprehensive plan changes that you'd want to recommend.
Yeah. Any
other comments?
Questions, suggestions?
Commissioner Olson.
I guess maybe I missed it, but so the small area plan guidelines, that's happening right now, and do you know when that's going to be completed, or hopefully that coincides?
Yeah, it's happening right now, so it is. If you want to take a look and make suggestions, it's certainly out there too, or as we go forth.
Okay.
But I'm not. Do you recall, Carrie, when she had it's a class due date? So.
Yeah, I'm not sure when we're looking to have that completed, but I think the idea was we were going to share that with the Planning Commission and get input before it's brought forward. We want to build in some flexibility, as each small area plan will have its own little nuances. But the idea is to bring that document before the Planning Commission.
And she just sent out a survey last week, so I don't know if the new commissioners may have been included on that.
Yeah, I think if she's not, if she hasn't processed the answers to that, it would be good to get Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Olson to
work
respond
on
to that survey
respond
as
to that
well.
survey, because there's a lot of interesting comments on there.
And I think it's a really good time for the two of you to do that,
Okay.
because you're going to bring fresh eyes to it that is an important perspective, and I think that would be really helpful to this process.
Oh, that'd be great. Mostly I was just hoping it was in place to help you, so.
Unfortunately not, but you do have an opportunity to help shape it, so that's exciting too.
All right, further questions, comments?
I just wanted to point
Commissioner
out, so the blue bus symbol, those are bus stops, is that correct?
I believe so. This came off Google, so
Yeah.
I didn't go out there and verify them.
I'm familiar that the buses do run up and down,
Yeah.
especially,
I think
I've seen them on
it's
there.
the 6.
yeah.
I don't know if it's the B or the D that runs through here.
So it goes up, it goes Wooddale.
Goes down
and then
Wooddale and then
probably up
eventually
to Southdale,
ends up at
Right.
Southdale.
which is that's an important
Yep.
feature.
It's a kind of busy hidden area, if that makes any sense. But
Cool.
well, thanks everyone.
All right, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Forrest.
I just wanted to add, too, that as you described it, a busy hidden area, it's also a true neighborhood node in that the businesses there are utilized by the people who live nearby, and so it's going to be really heavily utilized by those people, as well as some of us who don't live around there. So it will be really interesting to see how this compares versus, more of a citywide gathering spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Versus Grandview, which seems to, I wouldn't say it has citywide draw, but it has a much bigger draw, for example, than this area. It's kind of hidden in here, and it's just so close to the neighborhood. But it's obviously heavily used by this neighborhood area.
And all the more important to have a good engagement of the local stakeholders to make sure that they're driving the future of the area.
Great. So of course we'll probably come back and lean on all you people
There you go.
along the way too. If anyone wants to provide any drawing skills, we would certainly appreciate that also. Commissioner Schroeder.
All right, well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Platter, and thank you, Commissioner Forrest, for leading this effort. We'll look forward to hearing more as you move along in the process. Next up on the agenda is correspondence and petitions. You have in your packet an an attendance sheet. Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Olson aren't on this, but you will be on the next one because that will be your first meeting. This is kind of a handy way for us to keep track of our attendance requirements. And then also, the city manager has provided us with his regular summary of what has been happening at the city council, and I would note that one of the projects that you all worked on the meeting that I was not here was approved. The subdivision on Warren Avenue was approved by the council. And that's, I think, all we have on that front. Next, in chair and commission comments, I just wanted to note that a couple of things. One, we have an annual meeting of our commission every year, and the bylaws actually say it's the first meeting in February. But the primary purpose of the annual meeting is to elect officers and then to amend, if necessary, our bylaws. And since we don't appoint new commissioners until tonight, the first meeting of March, it didn't make much sense to have that annual meeting in the first meeting of February. So I talked with Carrie, and we talked about having it at the next meeting. It slipped my mind for this meeting, but we'd have it at the next meeting, to which Carrie told me that we probably don't need to have a next meeting, which would have been scheduled for the 26th of March, but we have no agenda items. And since we are having a work session with the city attorney at the senior center on Saturday, March 22nd, which will fill up a couple of hours, it seems fitting that we not have a meeting the following Wednesday. So no meeting that Wednesday, but our first meeting in April, we will have the election of officers and the revision of bylaws to the extent it's necessary. I would suggest one of the revisions to the bylaws be that we make that annual meeting in the first meeting of March, not the first meeting of February. So that's all I have in terms of chair comments. I'm happy to hear from others. Commissioner Potts.
Okay, a couple of events coming up on the topic of stormwater. One is in Morningside this Sunday from 2 to 4 at Weber Park. Stormwater Solutions, Rain Gardens, and you. And then a full citywide rain garden workshop on the 27th of March. I just wanted to point those out as this is an increasingly sensitive topic in the city. I don't think we're seeing any reductions in impervious surface as we view different projects going on. And like we talked about tonight, additionally with trying to manage tree removal and replacement again, the stormwater system is an important one. So all that information is on the city website for folks to find out.
Very good. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Commissioner Carr, did you have something?
Yes, Commissioner Schroeder and I attended the France Avenue Urban Design meeting on Monday night. And basically the green lights to go ahead and present, I believe, Commissioner Schroeder, correct me if I'm wrong, the green light on the first phase of this design project. I believe that some of the items need to be reviewed as far as the lighting choices, etc. But I will say this, the plan is spectacular, it's great. It's going to add greenery to France Avenue. This is just the first phase of it. There are other phases, but the first phase is adding greenery, restructuring the medians, and there's some beautiful architectural lighting that's going to go in on the ends of certain, well, I don't know, the medians, and they're very attractive and will actually be a focal point. So the plans are quite attractive, and Commissioner Schroeder knows more about those than I do, so maybe you'd like to describe the plan.
Well, I think Commissioner Carr can summarize it well. It is the first stage of following up to the pedestrian enhancements that the city has been pursuing in lieu of the pedestrian bridge that was going across France Avenue close to 72nd. So the improvements, the constructed pedestrian crossing improvements will start in April, and they will be completed, I think, by the end of the year. We'll be following on with the first stage of implementation of what's been referred to as the urban design improvements. And I think what was characterized to the ETC the other night is that we focus on implementing things that create the sense of a complete project with what we do now, and then begin to sequence how the follow-on stages to make a complete evolution of the corridor in the public realm of the corridor happen. And that work will be going to a city council workshop. And I can't tell you that it was originally planned for April 1st, but I think that won't happen. But it will be moving forward so that the city council can be looking at and eventually approve the first stage improvements.
So, just so that I'm remembering the history on this, as I understand it, there was at one point an application for a grant, and a grant was secured, and the idea was to put a bridge over France Avenue to help, pedestrian bridge, to help pedestrians get from the west to the east and vice versa. And after a lot of kind of examination and soul searching, people said, well, why would we do that? Let's just make it more porous in a bunch of different places by helping to have better pedestrian crossings in multiple places. Have I got that about right?
That's correct. So the enhanced pedestrian crossings will happen at 66th Street, 70th Street, and 76th Street. The first phase of those improvements will also include completing the sidewalk connections that happen on the east side of France, north of 70, maybe north of 76th, so that there will at least be a continuous pedestrian movement along one side of the corridor. The Planning Commission has talked about those improvements. When we looked at like the Starbucks proposal, we looked at how wide that should be. So there are some sidewalks in place that don't match, that don't conform to what we've talked about. What becomes important for the Planning Commission to consider as we look forward to other proposals is some of the underlying guidelines, guidance that this document suggests, and it has to do with orientation of buildings to France Avenue to create what we've been calling kind of pools of visible human activity. And it relates to the notion of creating front doors under France Avenue that are operable and energized. We had an issue with that with the project at 65th Street, which actually changed because of the Planning Commission's recommendations. When we look at buildings like Byerly's, how that building connects to France Avenue becomes important from the orientation of pedestrians. But we're not, through the plan, we're not suggesting changes to bulk or mass or zoning. We're basically trying to reinforce the underlying idea that making pedestrian activity on France more comfortable is an important part of this, and connecting development along France to the public realm is critical as properties evolve.
This is the second or third time I've heard about the lighting, and it sounds quite cool. Is there any place where people can see this yet, or was that yet to come?
I have a flash drive in my pocket. The presentation was forwarded to the engineering department this afternoon, so it may actually get up on the city's website at some point.
That'd be terrific.
And the idea is that the lighting that we're talking about will be kind of a signature aesthetic feature for the corridor. It might evolve as we move forward, but the notion was well supported, not only in terms of the structure of the lighting, but also the illumination quality that we're talking about. And it was, I'll note that it was embraced by at least one significant institution along the corridor, suggesting they wanted to be able to essentially play along well with the recommendations that are being made.
Well, it'd be a nice signal to the public that something's happening, and creating a new kind of identity and image, and that more is to come. So thank you for the summary on that. Any other questions for Commissioners Carr or Schroeder on that front? All right, very good. Carrie, Chris, and Jordan, any things from staff?
I have a couple things, just to update you on the council update of that subdivision, 63rd and Warren. You recall that the Planning Commission conditions were that we were going to revise the utility lines out into the street and try to save the trees along the corner. The applicant did submit revised plans, and they relocated the utilities, and so all of those trees along the corner and along the boulevard will be preserved with that project, so as recommended by the Planning Commission. And just to prepare you a little bit for the April 9th Planning Commission meeting, while we don't have any applications for March 26th, we have 3 already in for April 9th. That will be the WIC site. We've got the redevelopment plans in for that site.
Is that going to be a PUD?
That will be a PUD.
So it'll be a preliminary PUD approval?
Correct.
Okay.
But with very detailed plans.
That'll be nice.
And we also, you recall the sketch plan that we considered for the single-family home to turn that into a duplex on 49th behind the parking ramp. That application is in also, so we'll consider that one. And the Taco Bell has come in, so redevelopment of the Taco Bell site on Southdale Circle. So we'll be busy that night.
Yo quiero Taco Bell. Very good. And then another reminder, March 22nd, Senior Center, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. We're going to visit with the city attorney. I have been trying to capture the questions that have been coming up, and I've funneled those to Carrie. I think it would be helpful, Carrie, if you could circulate our total list to the commission, and then if you get that by email and you have any other, it triggers a thought about a question you'd like. I know from personal experience that it's a lot easier to be effective in answering those questions if you know ahead of time. So please just go ahead and share those with Carrie, and he can funnel those to Roger, and I think that'll be a terrific opportunity to talk about a lot of issues that we wrestle with over the months. All right, so Commissioners Lee and Olson don't know of our tradition that the newest members of the commission have to sing their school. I'm just kidding. Actually, at the first meeting, always have. No, it's actually much simpler than that. They have the privilege of making the motion to adjourn each meeting, and so since there's two of you, I would entertain a motion from either one of you.
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.